welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. On today's show, we have Leslie Katz. She is a top attorney focusing on government law and policy, as well as blockchain, energy, telecommunications, healthcare, cleantech, land use, and more. She helps her clients reach their goals by providing linkages that optimize the political, legal, community, and business context in which they operate. She provides strategic counsel for startups to Fortune 500 companies. And you're going to meet her in a moment here on Silicon Valley Successes. Leslie, thank you for being a guest here today on Silicon Valley Successes.
Sean, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, Leslie, you're actually the first lawyer we've ever had on this show.
Uh-oh.
So, a lot of questions for you.
Sure.
To start, when a startup comes to you, or a startup's thinking about a relationship with a law firm or a lawyer, what should they be thinking? When should that relationship start? Should it be after they've raised an A round, B round, or when they've created their product and they want to get IP protection? When should they start thinking about coming to a law firm and talking to a lawyer?
Actually, I know this sounds a little cliche, but the sooner the better. In large part because as they start to form all of these documents and ideas, they want to make sure they do it right so they don't have to correct it later. So a startup should try to find trusted counsel as soon as they can to make sure that they're doing everything the right way and they won't have to then redo it later or correct for problems or unintended consequences. So as they're getting ready to launch, their business, they certainly want to create their own business strategy. The attorneys don't do that. But once they have their business strategy in place and they need to start figuring out how to go to the next levels, they really should interview more than one attorney so that they find somebody that they're comfortable with. Decide, ask around, find out, folks that, attorneys that others have found have been helpful to them, companies or lawyers that have worked with startups before that recognize the specific needs that they might be having, and also that they'll want to interview lawyers to see who understands where they are, what their financial needs are. Obviously, a startup isn't going to be able to do a bet the bank kind of approach initially, but they want to find lawyers that recognize that and grow with them.
Now, when they're interviewing lawyers, what are some of the questions they should be asking?
Sure. They want to find out, have they worked in this area before? Do they understand their underlying technology or their underlying business model? Do they have either the direct expertise that the company or the startup might need, or do they have access to others? I think in today's legal profession, people have become very specialized. And, I often call myself a concierge for my clients, or a quarterback, depending on which analogy makes sense. But it's really working with them to find the best talent to give them the advice they need. Do they need a tax lawyer? Do they need an IP attorney to help them protect their intellectual property? Do they need somebody that might help with cross-border transactions that may be taking place? Do they need help with securities filings? Are they planning on doing an IPO, or in the case of some of the newer entities out there, a securitized token offering or something along those lines? So finding the right match and somebody that can guide them to that makes a lot of sense.
So you're saying during the interview, the questions they ask the person they're kind of interviewing could lead them to have 5 or 6 different lawyers?
Yes or no. It depends on the business. What you want is somebody who really understands your business and can get you off the ground, but you hope that they'll have access to some of the other expertise that might be needed. If a tax question comes up, is there somebody that understands the implications of registering in one location versus another? Most people want to incorporate in Delaware because the laws have been established. They're a little bit more flexible than some other states. So that's a decision that, is fairly simple, but there may be some other issues that arise from a tax standpoint that they might want to make sure that they're careful about. Again, there's so many different questions that come up. You want to feel comfortable with your lawyer knowing that either they'll have the answer for you or they'll know how to get it. You don't want somebody, though, that's going to make something up. So that's something you want to be careful and interview them. Find out what they've done before, what they're comfortable with. And startups need to be comfortable with their counsel as well, because as lawyers, we want our companies and our clients to grow and thrive, and it's a long-term relationship. We all hope that it's not something where we just jump in, draft a contract, and that's that. But we want to really have a long-term relationship with our clients. And conversely, the startup should want to have the same with their lawyers so that they can spend the time to explain their business model and what they're doing to the lawyer so they can help them, and guide them that much more. And also, one thing that people don't always realize, their lawyers can help them with other experts. They can go to their lawyers and get a recommendation for accountants or investment bankers or potentially investors, and guide them in those directions. So it's a long-term relationship, and ask all the questions. Interview a couple different firms or lawyers so that you have a comfort level with what you're working on.
So it sounds like once you have decided on a lawyer, it could lead to a lot of different paths. You'd mentioned they could make introductions to accountants, to investment bankers. So is that saying that for startups in general, they should look for a law firm that's a bigger law firm, more reputable name, or a small boutique one might be a better choice for them?
It's really going to depend on what they're comfortable with. There's great lawyers at both. I can't say do one and not the other, because I think there's value all the way around. But what you do want to make sure you find is a lawyer that recognizes where the startup is at that point in time. I often tell my clients, I don't want to charge a fortune for work that they don't necessarily need right now. I'd rather work with them and figure out what do they absolutely need when they're waiting to raise money, and what will protect the company versus what can they hold off on a little bit longer and not necessarily have to do right away, or find a way, a workaround on certain things. So there's some, off-the-shelf kinds of, you can get an employment agreement for your employees. An off-the-shelf kind of standard agreement doesn't take a lot of work. You don't want your lawyers, when you're a startup in the early stages, to go overboard on that. But you do want to make sure that your executives and the contracts around that and the stock options and other things are well thought out for the long term. So you put your resources into the more complex kinds of agreements and make sure that that's done well. And then over time, you can look at the other things as the company grows. If you're going out to investors, you want to make sure that your investment documentation is really strong and the terms are clear and people know what they're getting into, as opposed to having to fix it later or getting into trouble down the line. So both parties, the lawyer and the company, need to be strategic about what do they need right away and what can wait a little bit as they move along and grow.
Now, this is a pretty broad question, but when a founder comes to a law firm initially,
Sure.
They may not even know what they need or not need.
Right.
What does that consultation look like, and how do they know they're not getting, for lack of a better word, kind of hosed?
Well, absolutely ask questions. Ask, why? Ask, is it necessary? One thing that, as a lawyer, that I'm always worried about is when somebody comes and says, well, my colleague, my friend got this advice. I'm going to take their advice. Their lawyer said to do this. And it may not be the right advice for that company. That's, always a big concern, that people think they can do what everyone else is doing. But, a founder should come to their lawyer, explain their business, and make sure that the lawyer understands what their business is trying to accomplish, and then ask if what they're thinking of does or doesn't make sense, and what should they be aware of, One of the things I like to do is calling it sort of everyone has, we might call a checklist, but also an assessment. So one of the things I like to look at is, do we need to take a look at whether you've protected your intellectual property? Do you have IP that needs to be protected before you go out and start telling more and more people about your company? Do you have key employees that you need to make sure have the right kinds of contracts? Do you have potential investors that want to sit on the board? And if so, what kind of responsibilities and roles would they have and requirements? So there's, it's a give and take, questions on both sides, and they should feel comfortable in asking as well as being asked a lot of questions.
So when a startup has maybe new technology and goes to a law firm, so for example, a year ago, 2 years ago, all these new blockchain companies, they might have gone to several different firms and none of them had an expert that could help them in blockchain because they didn't understand the technology. Do you notice there's instances where the technology is a little bit ahead of what the lawyer's expertise are or the lawyer's knowledge of the industry at that given time?
In the case of blockchain, it's a great example of do's and don'ts for all of us. A lot of blockchain companies wanted to do an ICO, and I have one client that had a very complicated underlying business, and pointed out that in the environment that was being created, they needed to comply with the securities laws, and they'd probably have a target on their back for a lot of reasons, and that maybe an ICO wasn't the best thing to do, that they needed to go a little bit more deliberately and not just jump into it like everyone else. And my favorite story is this particular client of mine came back to me one day and said, my investors said, you need to go somewhere else, make them go faster. And I said, no, that's why I'm with Leslie. And now that all my friends are getting subpoenaed by the SEC, thank you for not letting me get out there. You have to be careful about jumping into something as lawyers too, making sure that you're giving your clients the right advice. In blockchain, it was new, but it was also not necessarily new. The law was existing at the time, and if you took a step back, it was fairly clear that the SEC was going to step in and want companies to follow the traditional regulatory framework. So you want lawyers that understand how to be creative. For every problem there is a solution. You just have to find it. But you don't want it so creative that it's going against guidelines that have been established. So it's a balancing act. With new technology, absolutely, it's going to change for everyone. And you want a firm that can help, or lawyers that can help you articulate the change, help you find new legislation or guidelines that will allow this technology to grow, and figure out what it is that is or isn't needed, and how to work within frameworks without getting into trouble, and then having to backtrack like so many of these companies did that jumped out too far ahead, that they're all now refunding the money or doing all sorts of crazy things. Some of them are facing even worse scenarios and just having to give the money back. So,
wow. And to find out more information like this and what's happening in Silicon Valley, please visit us at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, our LinkedIn and our Facebook page, where we provide weekly updates on what's happening here in Silicon Valley, so people at home and around the world can get insight and knowledge of what is happening here. Now, Leslie, companies that at the very beginning have no paperwork, no agreements, the founders just say, hey, we're 50-50 partners, we're owners, and they come to you. What happens in a situation like that?
We help them draft the agreements and get a clear understanding of what they want to do. The lawyer's job is to ask the right questions, to figure out what it is that they're trying to accomplish. The founder's job is to have a sense of their strategy and what they want to see done. They don't necessarily have, and then they shouldn't have it all written up. That's what they're coming to the lawyer for, to get that put down the right way. A really good way of thinking about it is, say you're doing a deal, whether you're getting an investment or you're looking at being acquired or acquiring, you want to make sure you don't have to have all everything written out before you go to the lawyer, but you have to know what terms you want to have accomplished and make sure that they're included. And conversely, the lawyer, who's probably seen a lot of these deals and seen where problems arise, needs to ask the right questions to make sure you get further information so that it can be put in the appropriate documentation. You know, my feeling is if you put a little bit more time up front to get it done right, it saves you an awful lot of time and money down the line if there's been a mistake that has to then be litigated or solved later. So the best time to put an agreement into place is when everything's going well and all the parties are fairly clear about what they want, and then you just have to make sure that that's put into the proper context.
So say things go well for a company over several years.
Sure.
How do they know it's time to switch law firms, or maybe they've grown out of that law firm? Or do you see companies or law firms that just kind of grow with their client?
Well, the hope for all of us is that we grow with our client and that we service their needs, that if we've done a good job early on, the client's successful. You know, we certainly, sort of going back, and we were talking a little bit about, fees and what you need to do in the beginning. You don't want to make it so difficult that the client doesn't grow because they've, just been spinning and spending all of their money, too soon. But, conversely, you want to make sure it's done right. And as lawyers, we want our clients to grow. If a startup comes to me, the best thing that can happen is that they take off and they thrive, and we get to do more work for them. And we're able to provide their HR legal, suit their HR legal needs, provide more IP work for them as necessary, that they're entering into more contracts that we get to work on with them. It's a win for all of us to be able to grow and thrive with our client and be able to serve their needs as they grow. So the hope would be we've established a good enough relationship that we're growing together, and the client needs to figure out their business strategy, but the law firm needs to be able to make sure that they do what it takes to protect that strategy and allow the company to flourish and grow. So hopefully it all works out and everybody grows together. But there are times where there may be situations where a startup has gone to a smaller firm that isn't able to deal with some of those larger transactions, and lawyers will be the first to say, you might need to look for somebody else who can handle this transaction, or here's a friend of mine that knows how to do this, or here's a good firm that specializes in this. And often, the original firm can stay on board and provide guidance and advice and oversee what's happening, but they may not necessarily be the best for that. So there's no one size fits all, and most importantly, I think the client needs to feel comfortable with the firm and be able to ask questions and know what they're getting into. Know what they're going to be billed for. That's also something, probably more than anything, that's where you see hiccups come up, where startups, they're used to bringing on advisors who give them free advice in exchange for equity. That's what an advisor does. Lawyers, on the other hand, some of them, bill for their time, and that's how they get paid. They're not getting equity, they're getting paid, and often we find founders and folks in startups don't realize that every phone call, their lawyer's charging for that phone call. They think they might just be making a quick phone, asking a quick question, but that does result in fees. So to be clear on that, both the lawyers need to let the clients know that they'll charge what they'll be charging for, or state, I'm not going to charge you for this phone call, or I'm going to do some research and not charge you. Or the client needs to say, hey, if I could just ask you this little question, can you just let me know? But you get what you pay for. If you want a formal legal opinion, don't ask somebody at a cocktail party, hey, what do you think of this? It's as good as the free advice you're getting. If you're paying a lawyer to give you an opinion, they have to stand behind that, both professionally, but also they have malpractice coverage if they give you a bad opinion. So you often might want to get a question answered in writing. Can you please confirm that the answer to my question is what you just said? And have them write that out and give you a written opinion. They'll charge for it, but you've got that in writing, and they'll be standing behind that.
So with that, and this information you may not want to give to our audience, but how can founders and startups negotiate terms or negotiate payment with lawyers, such as that advice you just gave? Oh, can I just ask a quick question and not be billed? what areas can they negotiate on, and is there ever an opportunity for them to actually say, I'll pay you in equity or crypto?
All of the above, yes. It's as diverse as law firms are in terms of how it's handled. Some firms are very clear, pretty much billing on everything. But right now, there's a trend, and lawyers are recognizing that the legal field is changing, and they need to change to meet their clients' needs. So some clients, I've had clients that pay me a monthly fee for up to X number of hours of services. So they can call up with any questions, and they know that they won't be charged more than a certain amount each month, and they can call and ask questions. Now, we usually put a cap on that because you don't want people calling you 24/7. But those are the kind of things you can put into an agreement, a fee agreement, and do a flat fee for advice. Or certain projects are just a flat fee, and it's the related questions that tie into that all come under a flat fee. Some law firms will take equity with their clients. Fewer and fewer will, in the days of the ICOs, there were many that would take crypto. But I think, you'll see more and more law firms being creative and willing to work with their clients because, again, it's in all of our interests for the clients to grow and thrive and to feel comfortable with their lawyers. But ask. That's the best advice I could give to founders. It doesn't hurt to ask. There may be, it may not be exactly what you ask for, but there may be something you haven't thought about that the lawyer might suggest, or by asking, the lawyer might say, yeah, sure. You never know. But all of us, I think, want to make things work for our clients, and we're willing to listen to their concerns and figure out how to structure it so that everyone's successful.
So far in our episode, we've talked about meeting lawyers and interviewing law firms. We've talked about the payment that they might take. We've talked about the importance of getting the paperwork done initially versus later on where it might be so much more expensive to get things fixed. What information did we not talk about today that you think founders out there should really know?
I think the best thing for founders is to be clear about what they're asking for. I recently had a situation where a client asked me for a written opinion on 3 questions, and I said we could get that information to him, but it turns out he really didn't need that. So rather than spending the tens of thousands of dollars to get a written memo responding to those questions, we happened to be on a phone call and realized that wasn't really the information he needed. We were able to kind of address some questions on that call. And so at the conclusion of it, I said, do you still really want us to write this memo? And he said, no. But had I not recognized that, and he had just gone ahead and had sent the email and asked that we do a fairly extensive amount of research on something that it turns out he didn't really need, once we had a better conversation, it saved him, in that case, tens of thousands of dollars. So a client, to the extent they can be clear about what they're asking for and what they need, or if they don't know what they need, to say that rather than asking for something, because lawyers will get a question from a client and they'll answer it, and that can be costly, whereas that may not exactly be what the client wants. So having that conversation with the lawyer, saying, this is what I want to accomplish, what should I be doing? Do I need some research done on this? What are the areas that I need to be careful about? Do I need a memo? Do I need you to research this? Or are you able to provide, quick information? What am I looking at? So I think founders need to be very clear about what they want, and that, similar like I was saying earlier, when you come in, if you can be as clear as possible on your term sheet, the lawyers can do it. If it's nebulous, and you come in with some things, but you change your mind a few weeks later, you're going to be paying for the first go-round as well as the second. So be clear about what you're looking for is probably the best advice I could give.
And while you're talking to a lawyer, if they were to give you an answer that maybe is unclear, or such as it could be this or it could be that, how should a founder respond to that where there is no clear answer, there's that void?
So one of the things we've been working on, because we're certainly in the blockchain space, there's often a lot in this sort of gray area. What we're doing is what we call our risk assessment. So we go through a client's business and we look at the different things that raise some concerns and say, here's the questions. This might not be clear, but here's the potential penalty if it's a problem. In some cases, it's significant and could be as much as jail time. So do you want to fix it? Or here's something that it's not clear, but you might get a $100 fine. Do you want to wait on that? What are your priorities? So there's no easy answer because often, there's, especially in the area of emerging tech, my favorite area to work in. I love working with entrepreneurs because every day is fun, it's exciting, and you're building something and creating. But it also means there are some questions. And so the founders should make sure they get clear answers. And if it could be this, if it could be that, ask the ramifications of going one way or the other. Is one better than the other? What are the possible concerns or risks that might come from going in one direction if it's not the right answer? But never hesitate to ask your lawyer questions. That's really, I think, the best way to avoid problems. People think lawyers might know all the answers, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they're learning them as well, as they're learning your business and trying to figure things out. Especially as we're saying, in the blockchain space, which is getting a little clearer, but there are issues that are still cropping up.
And Leslie, while we still have time,
Sure.
I want to say thank you for being here on Silicon Valley Successes. Can you tell the audience at home who is an ideal client for you and how they can reach you?
Ideal client is one for me that's fun to work with. As I mentioned, I like interesting technologies, emerging technologies. I like startups. It's a little bit easier to work with companies that have already done a little bit of fundraising and have some money available to bring in, a law firm. But I work with a lot of companies in the blockchain space, looking to set up exchanges, looking to set up, financial situations, without naming too many clients.
And how can they reach you?
Best way to reach me is on my cell, which is, give that out, 415-722-6547, or email lkatz@ckrlaw.com.
Leslie, thank you again for your time today on Silicon Valley Successes. And for everyone at home that wants to find out more information of what's happening here in Silicon Valley, visit us on siliconvalleysuccesses.com. Check us out on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we look forward to providing you more information next week. Thank you.
Thank you from all of us at Silicon Valley Successes. We hope you found the information presented today useful in your path to success. For further information on accessing the resources in Silicon Valley, you may visit us on the web at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, on Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you. And remember, we want to help you in your journey to become the next success.